I got to talk for a moment about Devonta Smith and just how special his 2020 season was. Like, you could sit there and say, well, he played in a system with a bunch of great talent, and that is true. You could say that, hey, the season was a little different, and it was, but it certainly brought its own challenges with it. You could say, well, maybe his quarterback, Mac Jones, should have won the Heisman, and I would have said, I don't know about all that. But when you look at the season that Smith had in 2020, it was special stuff. Really special stuff. And it's a big reason why he ended up becoming only the fourth wide receiver in history to win the Heisman Trophy, which is especially impressive considering that hasn't happened since the early 1990s. And when you really think about it too, in the past 20 years or so, the Heisman Trophy has truly become a quarterback award most years. It absolutely has. You'll have the guys like the Derrick Henrys and the Mark Ingrams and the Reggie Bushes win it and then rescind it. But generally, it's a quarterback award. So for Devonta Smith to not only win it, but not be a running back and win it, he joins the ranks of Johnny Rodgers with Nebraska in '72. And even then, he was splitting time between running back and wide receiver. You had Tim Brown back in the 80s in '87, and then you had Desmond Howard win it in the early '90s at Michigan, which was much about return, along with being a receiver. What Devonta Smith did was really impressive and really historic. Unfortunately, when you look at it, you say, oof, last time it was Desmond Howard. Desmond Howard didn't have the greatest NFL career. Johnny Rodgers didn't have the best NFL careers, but Tim Brown's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's one of the probably 10 best wide receivers I've seen in my lifetime. And I'm 40 now, so I'm not the youngest spring chicken, so I've got some length and time and tenure in this game. So when you think about Devonta Smith, it can be really challenging for a lot of folks because you got a lot of Bama fans, both legit real fans and bandwagon jumpers, that are going to defend this guy to the hilt and say, well, he succeeded at Alabama, so that automatically means that he's going to be a big success in the NFL, which is total bullshit, and we all know it. You have all types of guys at all types of positions that could be incredibly productive college players, and they lay a fucking egg in the pros. See Desmond Howard. See Peter Warrick. And we could go on and on and on with that list. And even when you talk about Devonta Smith as a prospect, you're going to have people say, well, he was utilized all over the place and did all of these types of different things, so he did it in college, he'll be able to do it at the NFL. Bullshit. That doesn't mean he can't, but that doesn't automatically mean that he can. But then there's also that tendency to dismiss what he did. Hey, he got to see the ball a ton, so maybe other receivers with more pure physical talent would have been able to put up similar or better numbers. So he was more so schemed for and given those opportunities. He just happened to make a lot out of them, which could be true. But he also got the opportunities and made the most out of them. And just because he plays at Alabama, I could sit there and say, well, Nick Saban's had some notable disappointments and bust in the league over the years. That's true. But, over the past 10 years, I'd probably take his history of producing NFL prospects over somebody like Dabo Swinney, wouldn't you? And if you think about it, I think you would probably agree with that. But it's trying to separate the fact from the fiction, the fanboy, fangirl type of bullshit with Smith, and really look at the nuts and bolts, and this is what it comes down to. And especially with Smith, it is critically important. Ignore the history of, well, wide receivers don't typically win the Heisman, and when some of them have previously, they haven't been NFL studs. That has nothing to do with Devonta Smith now. Nothing to do with it whatsoever. But just because he put up all these big numbers doesn't automatically mean that shit translates. And if you're in a position where your team is thinking about drafting him or could potentially draft him, you could self-talk yourself into believing that all the fuck you want, but it doesn't make it true. If it did, Bears fans over the course of 4 dumb-dick years would have turned Mitchell Trubisky into an elite quarterback based off of their positivity, stupidity talk. It doesn't work like that. It's about translatable skills and talents and how they project to the next level. I look at him and I say, he's arguably the best route runner in this draft. He will be a guy that should be able to get open. I don't think there will be a ton of challenges with that. He's a guy that has a very expansive route tree. He's sudden and smooth and quick and explosive in and out of his breaks. Like, we compare him to some other similar Alabama, wide receivers in recent years, the Jerry Jeudy's of the world, the Amari Coopers of the world, Calvin Ridley's of the world. Like, some of these types of guys where their primary skill in their game was more about route running and precision than it was about speed, explosiveness, and pure physical athletic talent. There's been some track record that these guys are able to make, and maybe the jury's still out on Jeudy, but Calvin Ridley's certainly done just fine. Amari Cooper, like, if you think about him as a big-time number one, he'll disappoint you, but if you think about him as a high-end 2 wide receiver, then you're not so disappointed. You might be paying him like a 1, but you get what I'm saying? Like, he's had a productive NFL career. And therefore, you actually have a little bit of precedent for some of these guys at this school that have a similar type of skill profile to Devonta Smith, not necessarily from a size, like height, weight standpoint, because that's a little different. That'll be a conversation we have in a moment here. But when you look at it, like, I would put him in that same class of route runner as those other guys. And when you talk about today's game, like, especially for some of these teams, they put a precision or put an emphasis and importance on route running versus speed and explosiveness. I think about, let's say, the Rams, for example, with the guys that they had the past couple of years like Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. It wasn't about speed and explosiveness. It was about route running and precision. And they made it work in that offense. He's a guy that's going to be able, I would anticipate, especially if you're playing him in the slot and you're giving him a free release, he's going to be able to be a guy with his quality of route running and his precision in his route running that's going to be able to get separation. And what I love about his game, he's got great hands, like really strong hands, does a really good job of meeting the ball with his hands, consistently makes catches from all over the place, all different types of body positions. He's got a phenomenal catch radius, arguably the best catch radius out of anybody in this draft. He's got fantastic body control to adjust to overthrown balls, underthrown balls, back shoulders, stops, fades, etc. Like, you name it. He's able to go get the ball at its highest point, especially in traffic. When you look at a guy like him and you're saying, and you're talking about all of what, 6'1", 160 pounds? And let's be clear here. You can believe the official listings of 170 or 175 all you want. That dude is like fucking 160, if that. And you know that to be true. But in those types of situations and spots, especially when it comes to the contested catch, he plays like somebody that's 6'4", 200 pounds. He really does, and it's incredibly impressive to see. You look at him and you say, for a guy that's not incredibly big, he played 13 games each of the past 3 seasons, so injuries haven't been a significant thing. And at some point in time, that kind of translates. Like, it's hard to project injuries and durability to the next level, because you'll have guys that never had an injury problem in college and they get to the league and they can't stay healthy. Like, that shit happens. Or you have guys that were hurt all throughout their college career, get to the pros, and they're able to stay healthy just fine. And sometimes it's just dumb fucking luck. Now, there will be concerns about his size and profile and how it translates to the league. And you say, you don't have a ton of guys with this combination of height and really rail-thin frame that make it for a long time in the league or make it at all, especially if they don't have great burst or explosiveness or speed. And it's a valid concern. It doesn't mean that he can't make it. It doesn't mean that he won't make it. It doesn't mean that he won't be a high-end slot receiver in the league. But it is a concern. And I look at him and I say, okay, he doesn't have great size. And then you look at Devonta Smith and I say, like, Jalen Waddle, I feel like is a player that you try to manufacture touches, more so to manufacture touches, try to get the ball in his hands and make big things happen. I feel like, whereas Waddle is that, Devonta Smith is more of a guy that you really got to scheme for within your offense and put him in situations in terms of the routes you ask him to do and the responsibilities that you have in order to get most out of him. I thought, Sarkisian and Alabama's offense the past couple of years did a fantastic job of doing that, but there's no guarantee that every NFL offensive coordinator or NFL head coach is necessarily going to do that. So with him, I think a little bit more than a Waddle or a Chase, it's going to depend upon system, usage, fit, how he's deployed, how he's utilized. That's going to determine just how good of a wide receiver he could be. I think for Smith, it concerns me a little bit more that he's got average to, little above average quickness and speed. Like, he's not super slow of foot, but he is not a burner. Like, if you watch him and Jalen Waddle next to each other, especially when you talk about in games, the difference is somewhat striking. Devonta Smith is not going to be a guy that consistently burns you down the field deep. He's just not. If you're going to say, well, he did that a lot at Alabama, then you need to watch closer. He wasn't burning people based off of his speed. He was burning people based off of precision of double moves or running across the zone and finding the void in the defense, which he's great at, by the way. But at some point in time, especially if you're talking about him being a true number one and not having a primary slot role and having to play some on the outside and potentially being shadowed by number one corners, like, I don't know if he has that beat you over the top home run ability in terms of quickness and speed. He has enough, especially when you talk about the precision of his route running and the level and quality of his route running. It just might be that it limits or caps his upside a little bit. Now, you can certainly work and develop on that, to be clear. Like, sometimes we act like these guys, when they're 20, 21, 22 years of age, that they can't get quicker, more explosive, stronger, faster, which is simply not true. Now, it would be very important for a guy like Smith, who already doesn't have that great burst in speed, that if he's going to put on some weight, to beef up a little bit, that he doesn't put on too much, that it takes away from his game and potentially slows him down a little bit. Not all weight or muscle you put on is necessarily good and productive weight. Now, I look at the weight concerns and I say, you want to see him add that on, but, just make a couple kids. Like, that'll put the 20 pounds on you real fucking quick. That'll get you the man weight. And then we got a superstar in the making. But all joking aside, like for Devonta Smith, he's the type of guy that in an ideal world, he would be a guy that you take in the late teens to early to mid-20s, that you say, we can bring him in as a rookie, he can have an impact. A Calvin Ridley type of guy, that you could bring him in, he's not the number one, but he could be a very, very high-end number two, especially early in his career. And man, we can be creative with how we deploy him and how we utilize him, and we could sit there and really have him make a difference and impact on our offense that takes us from being like that borderline bubble playoff team to being just in the playoff to being a team that could actually be a contender. Now, what I worry about a little bit is he gets drafted in a spot where he's going somewhere potentially in the top 15 where teams are going to be, potentially wanting more out of him or envisioning more out of him. Now, I do want to be clear. There are certain things about the draft game now that are incredibly overrated. My opinion. Things like left tackle versus right tackle. It's really stupid to invest a ton in your left tackle if all the premier edge rushers are lining up on the other side against your right tackle. Like, at some point in time, that just doesn't matter that much. That whole notion of, well, the best edge rusher always plays on the right side of the defense is just invalid and completely not true. And it's one of those dated approaches and philosophies to the league and football and the draft and positions and so forth that needs to go away. Similar to the importance, and I even find myself still saying it, talking about playing outside versus playing the slot. Like, so many of these guys line up in the fucking slot and all over the place now anyways. How much does it really freaking matter? And for some of these teams, their best weapon primarily plays out of the slot, and I can't blame them. Why wouldn't I want to get my guy, to back off the line and get a free release off the line and exploit that quickness and exploit that precision? Like, why wouldn't I? It's just when I look at Devonta Smith and I say, he's got great hands, he's a great route runner, can go get the ball at its highest point, but I still look at like that physical trait, like it holds me back a little bit from like totally embracing him as being the top receiver in this draft. I gotta confess, it does. And I worry about him like going to the next level in terms of how a team would utilize him and deploy him, and what happens if he becomes more of a primary focus of an offense, because you can say, well, you kind of did that with him at Bama. Yeah, but even then, in the passing game, you still had Waddle when he was healthy, and you had Mechie, and the year before, you also had Ruggs and Judy in the mix. So how will Devonta Smith handle being potentially the number one focus of an offense, therefore being the number one focus of a defense? The other big piece for me is I get concerned about how well he's going to be able to handle press coverage. Like, he's not a very physical player. Like, when you talk about that lack of explosiveness and burst, now you combine that with this potentially being able to disrupt his timing and get physical with him. Like, that route running is great, but if you can't get a release off the line because you're getting stoned, that's going to be some problems. So he's also not great after the catch. He's good after the catch, but he's more about outrunning angles of the defense versus making a ton of people miss. And that's where I think somebody like a Jalen Waddle differentiates a little bit. I think he's a good player, a really good prospect still. I've got a first-round grade on him, but like I said, he would be the guy that I'd be wanting to draft more. I'm not saying I want the Bears to draft him, but somewhere like in the Washington football team, Chicago Bears, Indianapolis Colts type of range, probably goes more in the New York Giants, Eagles, Patriots type of range. And it might work out, But I do think there are better receivers in this draft than Devonta Smith.